A nuclear submarine is the ultimate stealth weapon. Silent, invisible, undetectable. To preserve its stealth, a submarine on patrol needs to stay underwater for days, weeks, months at a time, and so does its crew of submariners. In fact, submariners often spend up to 3 months with no contact with the outside world. It's something that very few people will ever experience. So how is a submariner's life aboard a nuclear submarine?
Life on board is unique,
demanding,
different,
exciting,
intense,
hard work,
and cramped.
It becomes a family. You know, you're in a tube, underwater, for months on a time in some instances. The friendships that you make are long-lasting and fairly instant.
To operate on one of those machines and be part of a crew that does that work definitely is a privilege, and it's not for everybody. There used to be a joke that everybody was selected for suitability for submarines, but actually I think what really ends up happening is the submarine kind of selects you whether you're suitable for it or not. Those who are not suitable quickly fall by the wayside, and those who really are sort of adapted to it stay there the longest.
The people you work with are a special breed of people, and that's the only way you can describe them. They've all got a warped sense of humour, which you need to sustain you from going mad when you're cooped up in a tin can for long periods of time. But at the same time, you're kept that busy, you haven't got time to think about what you're actually physically missing.
Isolation from family and friends, and cut off from everything the wider society has to offer. Being a submariner requires great mental strength. Submariners cope with these psychological challenges by keeping busy and following strict routines.
The majority of the ship's company are working 6 hours on, 6 hours off, all the time, every day of the week, which is 7 to 1, 1 to 7. So you end up getting into a very special routine depending on which watch you're in.
During your 6 hours on, then you're principally at your place of work, which for me was the control room where the submarines commanded and fought. The rest of the time was usually spent either doing rounds of the submarine to make sure that it remains safe, or in the wardroom, being an officer or in one of the messes for the other members of the crew.
If you're work in a foreign section of the submarine, generally they work in 6-hour shifts. I worked in a propulsion, and because of the heat and the temperature and the noise that you have back there, we worked in 3 and 4-hour shifts. In those times off, you've got to eat, sleep and do all the domestic chores that you've got to do. Many, many hours of boredom and a few hours of excitement when things don't go quite as they do.
Shift patterns clearly set out the structure of a submariner's day, but from the confines of a submarine, is it possible to tell the difference between day and night?
In the submarines that I served in, we still had traditional periscopes, so in the hours of darkness, the control room would be in reduced lighting, such that if we needed to go to periscope depth, that the watchkeeper, the person looking through the periscope, would maintain some form of night vision. So in the evenings you'd be in red lighting in the control room and associated compartments. So it's quite easy to tell whether it was day or night. And then of course you've got the smell of the food being prepared, which also gives you a hint. Very different on the modern submarines, on the Astute class, because we don't have traditional periscopes. They're not hull penetrating, you look for a screen. So they can remain in white lighting all the time. Much more difficult for them to acclimatise to whether it's day or night.
Sometimes you lose track of the time of day. The only thing that tells you what time of day it is the meal that you eat. Sometimes the only time you know what day of the week it is by what you eat. The catering is done as such.
So fish on a Friday, curry on a Tuesday, pizza on a Sunday, steak on a Saturday. And that is the case in any submarine, and you try and change that at your peril. Definitely. When I was in command, I had someone who said, "Can we change the menu?" And you have a mutiny if you try and do that.
So the food on board is excellent, although we slag them off all the time. You know, and to primarily to keep them on their toes, but also for, you know, banter, if you want to call it that. The food is exceptional. For the amount of space that they have to produce that many meals, which is 130, 140 meals, they do a cracking job.
The limited space on board impacts all aspects of daily life on a submarine, and that is especially true for sleeping arrangements.
Certainly in the submarines that I've served in, there was never enough bunks, so we did hot bunk.
Hot bunking is primarily, there's two people sharing the one rack. When you've been shaken to get up to go and do your watch, you will lay the bed out as per the other person. So you will put his sleeping bag down for him. That's how you live for, 12 weeks.
My first 2 years as a junior officer, I had to sleep in the bomb shop, which is where they keep the weapons. So I didn't have a bunk to myself, and I had a very small compartment. The lights were always on. It was a working space, so it was always noisy, which made it really difficult for me because I'm a very light sleeper. I was quite irritable when I first started, as you can imagine, but you soon get used to it, and I discovered earplugs.
The use of water on board can also be limited depending on the type of submarine and the situation.
On diesel submarines, we were limited on water supplies. And water is always a critical thing on any submarine, even on nuclear submarines. So a submariner shower is step in, switch it on, switch it off, soak yourself down, switch it on, wash it off, get out the shower. There's no Hollywood shower standing in there for 5 minutes. You shouldn't get shouted at if you start having a Hollywood shower.
In nuclear submarines, we make our own water, so be careful with it because the water actually is for the reactor cooling, not for us.
Produce as much water as you can physically consume. The only time that gets rationed is if we're in a quiet area that we need to be in to go and do an op, in which case they'll minimise the amount of machinery running to reduce our physical acoustic signature of the platform.
If you use water, it means you've got to pump it out of the submarine, so that offers the enemy or whoever you're trying to hide from the opportunity to counter-detect you. So we shut off all the water, and I think the longest I've done is 2.5 weeks without a shower, which sounds terrible. The first couple of days are horrendous, but after that you kind of just sort of get used to it because everybody smells the same.
Amongst the challenges of living on a nuclear submarine, the answer to the biggest challenge is one that all submariners are unanimous.
The most challenging aspect of it was on a long patrol and no communication with home. So you have no idea what's happening, and 3 months is quite a long period of time, not knowing. And you can only hope and keep your fingers crossed that everything went well when you get home.
In those quiet times, you will always think about your family. And that gets worse. When you get married, when you have children, that's when it bites. I had children late in my career, and I was grateful for that because I didn't spend too much time away at sea while my child was young. And the reunion is very emotional. Returning home after a long time away is very emotional. It's quite draining actually, and draining for your family because they, what's it going to be like? Is it going to be the same? Have we changed? And you do worry a little bit. And then of course immediately you're reunited, it's hugs and tears, and then you've got to go home and get back into the routine. And if you've been away from home, my wife very, very often would say, "You're not the captain in this house. Stop ordering me about." You've got to remember that your family unit is a family unit, and they will, in the same way as the submariner will get into a routine of 6 hours on, 6 hours off, and eating this food on this day, the family has to do something very similar.
When you go away on special operations, whether it's on an SSN that's going on patrol or a SSBN that's going on a deterrent patrol, we have no physical means of communicating back to our families because we're shut off from the world.
The only means of receiving a message from loved ones is via a means of communication completely unique to the Submarine Service, known as a familygram.
So familygram is a very short piece of text made up of so many words which you receive once a week, which is written by a loved one, somebody who you want to communicate with.
It comes in a little strip with 40 words on, and it describes their week at home.
In most instances, in fact all instances, they're one-way traffic from your family to the individual on board the submarine. Still a thing today, and very, very unique to the Submarine Service.
Any discrepancies or bad ones, okay, where somebody's died or something like that, they're edited by the captain and the ROs, so that you won't actually receive any bad news or information until you get back.
The information that came through from a family grant perspective, they come out all on one big sheet, and it was mine and the radio supervisor's job to read through these to make sure that there wasn't any coded messages that were being sent through or anything that was bad news or those kind of things. Deliver them to the captain, highlighted with those particular points on them, and he would decide whether the person actually got them or not.
Some of the wives used to be quite clever in using all 120 characters. In other words, they would write a message 120 characters long, and then when you got it, guys would sit down with their pen going through trying to clock the words down, and there would be all sorts of cryptic messages.
Families have got to be very careful how they use those words and those characters to make sure that the message is unambiguous. Don't try and put code in it, or lots do. What we also make it known to the families and those people that are writing those is that by the time their loved one reads that, probably 6 or 7 other people have read it as it goes from their home computer into Northwood and then up to Scotland, and then when it finally arrives on the submarine, the communication staff will read it to make sure there's no bad news in it. And if there's bad news in it, the captain can remove it, because there's nothing worse than getting really bad news and there's nothing you can do about it, because, you know, if the submarine's on patrol, it's going to stay on patrol.
I didn't really see any that you would want to keep from anybody, but I have heard some horror stories with people where they basically said, I'll give your dog away, I'm moving out of your home, and by the way, I've closed your bank account down, that kind of thing. So yeah, not fantastic when you're on a long patrol.
The safety of submariners has improved exponentially since the development of nuclear submarines. However, life on board outside of operations can still have its unnerving moments.
Probably as a trainee, hearing a flood alarm go off for the first time, for real. I mean, it wasn't a real flood, but it was a flood alarm without an announcement to say that it was a test. I mean, flood is bad, you know. And as soon as the flood alarm goes off, the submarine has an emergency procedure and races to the surface as fast as it can and blows all its air, and you will be on the surface. You know, as soon as that started, you're not stopping it, you're going to be on the surface. And hearing that and feeling that for the first time, because it's quite a steep angle as you come up, and you can feel it's quick. The general alarm goes off, and then there's loads of main broadcast pipes that go on to shutting bulkhead doors and getting ready to surface. Is pretty emotional.
Part of being a warfare officer is being qualified on the bridge of a ship or a submarine, and the bridge of a submarine is the top of the conning tower or the top of the bridge fin. I remember it was probably around about the early January going out to sea on a patrol, and the weather was really foul and quite dark. I remember going up to the bridge and the usual hiss and spray of all the water coming over the top as an Atlantic gale rolled through towards the Scottish coast. On this particular night in question, I remember there being quite a loud crash of a wave and a massive whoosh of air, and the next thing I knew I was hanging outside of the fin, so I'd fallen outside of the submarine hanging on my safety harness and then trying to pull myself back in. Luckily, the next wave came along and picked me up and almost put me back inside the submarine again. So that was pretty terrifying. I mean, there was a period of time whilst I was there trying to re-establish myself where the water was over my head. That's the only time, I think, holding my breath, that I thought, if I can't hold it any longer, I'm probably going to drown. So that's one of those hazards that you have to just try and manage.
Ultimately, your seniors have made those decisions. They've done an estimate. They understand if that's the right thing to do. From a military perspective, we are paid to deliver violence to the enemy. After all, the ship's company know that. We're trained to do that.
Leo has my permission to fire.
So I haven't met a single person that would say that they wouldn't do it. I know there's been lots of, movies written about, especially SSBNs and whether you'd fire or not. Again, I haven't met a SSBN captain in command that would have any doubt that he's there to perform a duty on behalf of the government, on behalf of king and country. So it's the ultimate deterrent. And if you're not going to use it, then it's not a deterrent. We never want to use it, clearly, but it is a deterrent, and therefore we must have the ability to use it.
If you question what you did, they could have got another 2 missiles into 2 different big towns, and think of the consequences of that. The idea is there, we are a retaliatory strike back, and the idea is that we're there as a deterrent. You won't hit us because we will definitely get you back.
One of the thoughts that goes through your head as you're practicing for these things, we do a thing called a weapon systems readiness test, where the whole submarine comes to action stations to simulate one of these launches. You know that we have not been the country that's doing a first strike on something. It's usually that we are, there's an imminent strike or we have been struck, so therefore our loved ones at home have probably perished. So I had absolutely no compunction to carry out that activity. There was no second thoughts with those ideas.
From a personal point of view, we're there for to protect the realm and everything else that goes along with that. It's a choice you made. It's no different to when I was in general service and we had guns and helicopters. If you get to the stage where you've got to use those weapons, then somebody is given that authority for that weapon to be used, and all the things that are taken into account in order to give that order to fire, to use that weapon, and then that's it. It's got to be done.
If you haven't got a nuclear weapon as a bargaining factor, if you want to call it that, you ain't going to sit at the top table. Your country all of a sudden now becomes third rate, and that's why we have them primarily. One, for our own defence, but at the same time to say that we're part of a collaborative team of specialist countries that have this capability.
He's done his job. It's been there since the 1960s. I hope that those that are in the position to make a decision make the right decision at the right time, should they need to.
Being a submariner is not for everybody, but for those who find their calling in the service, what is it that keeps them wearing the dolphins?
The best thing about being a submariner is, without question, the people. There is utterly no doubt. The people, the camaraderie, the feeling of belonging to a team that's that close-knit, that is unique, it's different. It is an odd career to choose. I want to go away and go underwater for months upon a time and very rarely visit a foreign port, but we do it.
It's an exciting job. It's well paid. You go and see most of the world. You go to areas of the world that nobody else can go to. You'll see things that you've never seen. In some cases, you've never been there before, and you haven't been there when you've been there. I would recommend it to anybody to go and do, whether it's female or male. It's a one-off job that I've enjoyed for 32 years.
But what everyone really wants to know about a submariner's career is without doubt the most exciting aspect of life in the submarine service.
What can you tell me about operations?
Very little. We go to sea, we dive, and we come home again.
I think the really interesting thing about the operations that submarines do is that usually people think, oh, that can't be done. But the really good part of it is they can and they do. And unfortunately, they're the points that I can't really talk about.
Can't tell you. And that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, really, really interesting, really exciting, and I can't talk about it.